seeing double right now. This is amazing. But I was just introducing myself. I'm John Uggan, creative producer at Angel City. I've been part of the team since day one when we launched Let back in June. But I'm going to give you the floor, Jessica, because you were the best, and we want you to moderate this whole thing.
Thank you, John, and hi, everyone. I know I'm supposed to be the host and facilitator today, but I do have something to admit. This is my first IG Live, so I hope you guys will be kind to me in case I do something I'm not supposed to. But I just wanted to say thank you to the entire Angel City team, to John, to Julie, to Catherine for having me on here, and of course our two very special guests who are not that are so wedded to the Angel City family. Of course, Lori and Ronnie, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. This is admittedly my first Instagram Live as well.
I was just on the phone with her going, you can't do it on your laptop, Ronnie. You can't, you got to do it on your phone.
I embarrassingly signed up for Instagram last night.
Well, let's get those followers up for Ronnie, everybody. So go to her Instagram and give her an ad.
I'll follow you, Ronnie.
Well, for those of you who are just joining us who are wondering why, we're all here today, it's really because we want to uplift Asian American and Pacific Islander voices and stories every month, but especially this month because it's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And this month has been so important for a lot of us, even though we only celebrate it 1 month out of the year. The Asian American community has been under attack for the past year with a rise in hate crimes and attacks. And so I know for so many of us, it's really important to be telling our stories, to share our successes and things we've learned, and to be proud Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders first and foremost. And so I'm so excited for this conversation because I know that it's a key part of who I am as a public servant at City Hall. And I can only imagine that it's been such a key part of who all you are in all your roles in the Angel City family. And so maybe we can just get started and kick off our entire conversation. And maybe I can start with Ronnie. What and how does your identity being Asian American mean to you, especially in your role as an athlete?
Yeah, I would say growing up, I didn't really fully appreciate what it meant because there weren't, where we grew up, there weren't a lot of people who looked like us. And the other part is that we're half, and so being half Chinese and knowing our mom's story and how she got here, it was always a source of pride because their family came over with just the clothes on their back, and all of them put themselves through school and amazing schools and forged their way like a lot of immigrants do, but kind of quietly and humbly. And then there was the side of us that our father was Caucasian, and I would say growing up we sort of didn't really fit in either of the two worlds. We would go to a Chinese restaurant and we would be given forks. And then we would go to school with our dad who came for parent-teacher night, and people would look at him and go, "That's your dad," because he was a white guy. And so I think that throughout our childhood, and Lori can also speak to this too, I would say that I don't know if we fully appreciated either side, but instead we sort of forged our own way as Hapas, as half, and then we found other half Asian people and sort of, kind of like, yeah, represent Hapas, right? But I would say that I probably didn't really fully dive into each of those sides separately until college and even after college. And especially in the sports world, there weren't really any Asians to look up to. Bruce Lee was like the only Asian, and I didn't consider him a movie star. I considered him like a you know, a master martial artist. And even though it seems like a little bit silly, there just wasn't anybody else. And so the people I looked up to were my brother, and my sister and I basically just decided that we were going to play whatever sport he played. And I looked up to my sister. You know, we grew up playing together, and
You're
we
making her
challenged each
blush.
other. So we challenged each other. It wasn't, you know, sadly there weren't Asians that were really prominent. There weren't people that looked like us to really forge the way. So for me, it's actually even more important, just to answer your question, it's more important now more than ever, to kind of embrace that, because there are so many people of both of mixed heritage and, you know, AAPI that are looking to see role models that look like them, and come from backgrounds like them, and just to be able to emulate and have role models like that.
I love that. Thank you for sharing and giving some sisterly love at the same time too. Before I turn it over to your sister, who I know is blushing right now, one of the stats that I read recently from a report that a new AAPI organization launched, actually it is called literally launched, it's with a double A, is they put out a survey to Americans and they asked, please name one Asian American figure. And over 40% of people who filled out the survey couldn't name a single prominent Asian American person, which is really shocking because I feel like there's so many now. And the other top two answers were Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. And they were amazing trailblazers in their own right, but this survey wasn't taken, you know, 5-10 years ago. This survey was taken a few months ago. And we have a very prominent Asian American woman who we know who's in the White House, our first South Asian and Black vice president. In California, where we are, we have the first Filipino American Attorney General, who is Rob Bonta. And so I think that's so interesting that you say that, because it's clear that we have a visibility problem, right? That we need to not just be Asian, but we have to be Asian and proud and say it out loud. And maybe I can turn it over now to you, Lori, and ask you a similar question as your sister. And, you know, how did this API identity play into who you are personally or professionally?
Yeah, I think like Ronnie, I mean, we had a biracial family, multiracial, I should say, because I remember a very distinct conversation I had with the Asian Student Union in junior high school, and they were like, you need to join our student union. And I was like, no, I don't. Like, you have to tell me what I need to do or not. And they're like, well, you should be proud of your Asian heritage. And I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm just as proud of my Asian heritage as I am my Irish, English, Polish, German, Scotch, French, Dutch, Welsh, Italian. So you're not asking me to join those groups, and I don't think those student unions exist. So I'm gonna just politely decline. And I think they were like really upset at me for declining. And part of it was this sense that, like Ronnie was saying, we weren't really sure what our identities were. People didn't look like us. I mean, honestly, we looked more Filipina than anything. And when we would be like, our home, where we felt the most at home, was in Hawaii, which we were there every other Christmas. And so it was like the place where we found identity, but we weren't Hawaiian. We weren't, you know, and so it was also a battle. Like, you had this like pride. I don't know if I felt pride in the fact that, oh, I know how to eat a whole fish. I know how to do that. I know how to do all these really cool things that our mom taught us to do on her side of the family. But then, of course, there was also like, I hate to say it because I'm embarrassed, but it was like a shame as well, because of the way that people were portrayed who were Chinese. In movies, they were always portrayed as just these horrible stereotypes. And the identifying with that also gave shame. And so, you know, people would like look at you and slant their eyes and like, you know, say something or like be like, what are you? You're like, what do you mean, what am I? I'm human. And so it kind of, there was like this weird identity that I think I was battling with too, and really didn't embrace until more adulthood, when you could celebrate those pieces of you, and we could celebrate, you know, the Caucasian side just as much as the Asian side, but recognizing that the Asian side came with a lot more, that there was like a lot more discrimination. And I went to school in the South, so I showed up at UNC Chapel Hill, and there were like, I was told it was like the most diverse school around, and it was the most diverse school around. But when I showed up, there were like Confederate flags flying out dorm windows, and like I remember just being like, I don't see anybody who looks like me except for the other girl who is from Northern California, who's half Filipino, and her name was Tiffany Roberts Sahadak, and played on the national team with me and Ronnie, and played at UNC, and we're still really good friends. But she and I were like the only ones who looked like us. And one of our teammates thought we were Mexican until my junior year. And so it was kind of like, it was just, you know, it was a confusing time, but at the same time, you're like, you grow into it and you recognize how special it is to be part of a community, and then realize like how much you have to speak up about it, about wrongs, about discrimination towards anybody. And because you start to feel it in different ways. Definitely discriminate. I got asked where my green card was when we went to play Clemson one year. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody has their own stories, but that was kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is like, this is not covert. This is overt. But you're right. You know, not having people to look up to that looked like us, was kind of a travesty, because I don't think I realized how special it was, and the community, and people like, you know, that were in places where I wanted to be, and the importance of that until much later.
Thank you for that, Lori. And I think that's why I love LA, and why I love working with your team, because you know the importance of being in a place, in an organization where you don't just tolerate diversity, but where you celebrate diversity. And it's a key part of the mission and vision of who we are at the city of LA, just as much as I know it's a key part of who you all are at the Angel City family, which is really beautiful. And I think it's a great transition point to you, John. Did you have the same experience? I know you grew up in a few different places.
Yeah.
And what was it like for you being Asian American, and where did you grow up, if you can tell everyone?
I mean, that's a good question. Well, I was born in Guam, so technically I'm not really Asian, you know. So like, I've always kind of categorized myself as Asian just by the way things have worked in the world, right? So I put myself in that category. I'm very close to being Filipino. We're very like, Guam is very close to the Philippines, so like I get it. But I moved to Japan, and because my grandfather was in my father was in the military, and you know, I was able to be on base with all different types of military kids as well, and I had that experience where I did kind of get a little bit of racism when I was there. So I felt like an oddball, because even if I was in an Asian country, there was whites and blacks and Mexicans, but no other Asians like myself, or Islanders like myself. Then I moved to Hawaii, and Hawaii is like, as you both were explaining, I felt really comfortable. There's no like indication of racism on the onset. Like, it's actually the opposite, you know. Because it's a melting pot of all different types of cultures. We are like you wake up and you see an Asian, you see a white person, you see a Hapa, and we're all just in the same boat, and we're all like on the same island enjoying life, and that's just sort of how it worked. So I never really like grew up with racism until I moved out here, and you know, sometimes I'd walk around and somebody would talk to me in Spanish. And look, I get it, but it did feel a little weird. And when I started to just accept the idea that my race just didn't get recognized, you know, like being from Guam is like no one's going to put their time and thought into understanding who we are. I just, you know, being from the islands meant so much to me, because I never really thought about race being in the islands. Like, we're just, you know, sorry, I'm a little bit rambling here, but to get to the point, like, I never experienced what it meant to be something different until I moved here. So yeah, that's why I'm so passionate about this subject.
Thank you, John, and appreciate you opening up. I know can be so tough to talk about, especially in such a public audience, because it's not about our work, it's not about our careers, it's about like our personal lived experiences. And I think what you just shared there just highlighted how diverse the Asian American and Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian community is. And that's really what May is about, is to show that diversity, because I think oftentimes we know that we all get lumped into the same category, and it can be very tough because there's so much that's lost when we're all lumped into the same group. And that's why it's important for you to keep sharing your story, even though I know it's so tough, because there's a lot of people who identify with everything that you're saying and they see themselves in you. And so I appreciate you taking that time to open up. And I know that you're all getting a lot of love I saw a lot of hearts when you were talking. And maybe this is, I'm going to take one of our questions too. I know a lot of you submitted questions ahead of time, and I'm going to take one that I think is a good transition point, and maybe a lighthearted question, hopefully is from, I like her @name, her handle, Miss Kibbles and Bits. She asked, Miss Kibbles and Bits asked, Ronnie and Lori, were there any AAPI professional athletes that you looked up to or knew of when you were younger? And if so, did it have any impact on you in your career? Maybe we can start with Ronnie.
Well, it's such a tough one, because I feel like, the athletes that we looked up to, they're just, like I said, I saw Bruce Lee as an athlete and not as a movie star. And so that was kind of like, for me, if there was one Asian person, that was it. And growing up, even in Northern California, where it's, extremely diverse, at least I felt like it was in comparison to other parts of the country. We watched football with our dad, and, Jerry Rice was like, the guy, but he's not Asian. So I would say that that's a really tough question for me, because we just didn't have anybody, or at least I didn't identify anybody. And in terms of the decision to pursue soccer as a professional career, for me, it felt a little bit more like we were paving the way and less like we were following, or at least trying to pursue, like trying to follow a role model that just wasn't there. So for me, my role models were the sort of the bread and butter U.S. women's national team that got down and got into the grassroots communities and went to the youth soccer tournaments and gave us our medals when our club team won, and stayed after on the field in La Jolla, signing on the polo grounds, signing their autographs on, these posters that we ended up hanging on our walls. Like, those were the people, the Karen Gabarras and the Michelle Akers-Stahl, like those were the people. Joy Fawcett, she was, these were people that were touchable for us, but they weren't Asian. And so the sad reality is that we looked up to those people because they were soccer players and they were touchable, and that was the grassroots movement for them, and for us to make it real. And then, so on the flip side of that, going into professional soccer and just continuing to pursue that, one of the most amazing experiences is having little Asian girls or boys say, hey, or Hawaiian, there were a bunch of Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders that said, hey, you look like me, even though you're not from Hawaii. My kid can be like you. My kid wants to be a professional soccer player. And that's like, for me, that's what it's all about, right? Being able to create that persona, and being able to have some little person look at you and go, I want to be just like her or better, and I hope they're better.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It sounds like you both are a dynamic duo and are blazing a path for young girls and women in professional soccer. They're going to look at you, and you are going to be the heroes. You are the heroes for so many women. And so I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to what your sister said, Laurie.
No, she's right. I don't remember having any Asian American and anybody who looked like us. So I would say that the closest thing that really wasn't, I mean, we had Christy Yamaguchi, Michelle Kwan, but they were figure skaters and we were not girly girls. We did not, and I'm not saying that figure skaters are girly girls, but like the outfits alone kind of pushed us away from figure skating, that kind of thing. But they're athletic, they're amazing athletes, and they were awesome, but they weren't soccer players. Michael Chang, a tennis player, and all three of them, by the way, like they didn't look like us. So I agree with Ronnie. I see there's a question down there that says, how can Angel City do better? And I just want to like, maybe, can I shift over to that? Do we mind?
It's I think it's from the president, Julie. Thank you, Julie.
I know, right? I think that, you know, a lot of trust needs to be built with community, and to see the trust, you need to be able to build it through like your actions and who you see. And in order to have these actionable conversations, you have to have this open space of trust. So you have to have these conversations, but in order to build those conversations, you have to have this familiarity. And familiarity, the precursor to that is exposure. So like you have to start with exposure, and then you have familiarity, and then you can have the trust, and then you can have these conversations. And it doesn't start without that first step of exposure. And so I want for such a melting pot in Los Angeles to have that representation. And it would be great if it was on the team, but if we don't have that much parity where, you know, Angel City Football Club has that kind of representation because, you know, maybe they don't get as many good opportunities, it better be present in our community work. You know, it better be there when we're reaching out into the communities and finding all those little girls and all those little boys that are maybe not involved in club soccer, that are playing in the parks, and they are phenomenal. And all they need is an opportunity. They need some exposure, and they can pursue it. They can do whatever.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely right. And I think a great transition question for Ronnie too, because you bring up visibility and raising awareness and your work. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you do, John, for Angel City, and like how important is it that platforms like this on social media, that we continue to tap into them to continue the storytelling and visibility?
I think it's super important. It's very critical that like we stop making these sort of months trendy, you know, and I think it's something that I see often, you know, I've been working in social media and content for years now, but every time there's a Black History Month, we spend 28 days in February and spend time highlighting all the great people in Black History Month. And then come March, we move on to women's, you know, I feel like we need to do a better job not making this trendy, just in as a society. And so I think we can, if we're talking about how to do it better, it's just extend those months, these heritage months, have conversations and with people who are like this, like people who are in the communities, and extend your knowledge more than a post on social media. Because too often I see somebody, like it's AAPI month, and I see somebody going to a sushi restaurant and be like, yo, I'm supporting the Asians, but it's not really authentic. And I think we need to go past that and really try to do better as a society.
John, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You work in social media, and is that the equalizer? Is that a mechanism that can be used for, what you're talking about, is extending these things and extending the conversation within our community, but then also outside of it?
Yeah. I think it's look, if you're going to use, it depends how you use it, right? if you're going to use it just to get some clout and just to say that you did it, just to throw the hashtag on there, then there's no point in doing that. But if you do it in an authentic way, like, hey, here are like 10 great people that you should be following that happen to be Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders. Here's a great movie that I saw that Taika Waititi directed. And like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it needs to be a little bit more meaningful. So to answer your question, social media is very useful for this kind of thing. And it's the whole reason why we're having this conversation. But I think it needs to be used in the right way.
Authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know
I think the other
Oh, go ahead.
the other half of it is, obviously having the conversation, but also education. I mean, in our schools and in our youth, we talk about some of the, racist history of the United States, but we never ever talk about the laws passed in the 1800s, 1900s, prohibiting Asians from owning land in the United States, and or the Japanese internment camps, or just the way people are treated throughout history. That's just completely left out of the history books. And I think so part of social media is also education, right? Let's bring these things up and educate people, and why is this important, and why is this historically important, and where did this come from? And the other really difficult thing to get over is that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders historically have been this sort of, the model minority, right? These are the people who've really made it in the United States, and have done it humbly and quietly, and they're in institutes of higher education, and and they're but they're really making it. And it's like, no, I mean, that even that term, the model minority, is it's sort of derogatory, right? It sort of creates a divide between minorities that have experienced racism, and then it also creates a divide. Oh, well, we've done, there's other minorities that have had worse off than Asians, because now look at Asians, they're like in all the schools and institutes of higher education and in medicine, and and I'm in medicine, and there's a ton of Asians that are physicians, but ask how many of those Asians are actually in positions of power, in leadership positions. None. There's not. There's very few. And so it's a little less overt, but as Lori said, it is overt. It's less recognized by people, perhaps. But I think the whole point, like, I think social media is an amazing platform just to educate people, and then actually speak of these things and talk about and that's maybe a starting point.
Absolutely. I think everyone here made such great recommendations about what we can do to equal the playing field. Storytelling with a purpose. I love that. I saw that in the comments. Public education and outreach is great. Disaggregated data is also what I heard, so we can really see where the disparities are in the larger Asian American community. And I think another one too that you're kind of touched on right there, Ronnie, is really around ethnic studies, right? Is thinking about what we learned when we were in school. And it almost feels like for those of us who took any Asian American or ethnic studies classes, maybe in college, it almost seems like a missing page of our history book, right? Where it's like, whoa, how come I didn't learn this when I was in elementary school or in high school? And I know that we're lucky to be in a state like California that is very progressive, that is continuing to broaden the curriculum and what we're teaching our young kids. And so it's going to be a really important part for how we educate and hopefully mobilize the next generation. And I'm going to take another question here because I think it ties in so beautifully to everything that we're talking about. It's from Summer0001. And what can people of all colors do to help support the AAPI community? And like, what a beautiful question, right? So what can they do? I know for us at the city, and I'll start while I give you all a chance to maybe come up with one thing you think people should galvanize or go towards, is for us at the city right now, one of the things that we're trying to work towards is, we know that the rise in attacks against the Asian American community have been on the rise. From March of this year to March of last year, there have been over 6,000 attacks nationally, and in California, they're happening in the big cities like San Francisco, like LA, and that's scary. And so for us, one of the things that we're encouraging at the city is to report hate crimes to 311, to 211, or of course, if you're a bystander, to call 911 if you're witnessing something happen in action. And the reason why I bring this up as something, as an action item, if you're watching and listening, is because just last week we saw an anti-Semitic attack happen at a sushi restaurant in Los Angeles. So this is something that's happening right now in our own backyard. And so for me at the city, that's one of the things that I'm encouraging, is how do we help the AAPI community is by not being a silent bystander when we see these things happen, to report it. And for you, if you have experienced a hate crime yourself, I'm sorry, and I hope that you do report it as well, because that data is so important for us at the city, if you're a policymaker or an elected official, to make decisions about where resources go. And so for us, that's how we're trying to do better. And so maybe I will pass it next, and maybe you can tell us what's one thing that you want to, what's the one thing you would share to people watching and listening about how they can support communities like the API community. Maybe we'll start with John.
It's a good question. I think just first of all, definitely support Asian businesses and Pacific Islander businesses. Go get a Hawaiian plate lunch down in Orange County. I know a good spot called Matiki. For sure, go there. Yeah, it's really good spot. But I'd say, like, relinquish your stereotypes. You know, like, stop placing stereotypes on just groups of people in general. I think you can do that with all the other ethnicities and cultures and, you know, groups of people. I think you just be a better person in general. But I think that would help us as a community go a long way, because we're not just good at math. We're not just you know.
I'm terrible at math.
yeah. I'm definitely bad at math for sure. But yeah, I'd say relinquish the stereotypes. Get to know people. Have those conversations.
Love that. Relinquish your stereotypes. Maybe next we'll go to Lori.
100% I'm with you guys both, what you said. I would also just say, you know, being a mom, just raising your kids right. I mean, we might not have gotten it right all the time. The generations before us might not have got it right, but we have a chance to really raise our kids right. And you know, our kids, Ronnie and my kids, are quarter Asian, and they range from how they look to Asian to really not. But like I said before, like creating that space for conversation and learning at a younger age, and talking about what it means to stereotype, what it means to discriminate. What about like, you don't have to say that you see no color. You can say that there is like differences there, but these differences are not bad, they're good. And then what it means to have these experiences and have them ask questions, and they're not too young to learn. My kids were asking all sorts of questions about, you know, George Floyd's murder, and we were answering them, and we said, look, you know, we're happy, like we didn't want to put you guys in harm's way just because we were afraid of, you know, what was going to go on during the marches, but do you guys want to go? And our kids both said, yeah. So we're like, okay, what do you want your signs to say? You know what I mean? And they wanted to go, but they're such sponges, and we have an opportunity to raise our kids right. So create that space for that learning. And again, like, you know, trust it's the precursor to familiarity, and familiarity, that the precursor is exposure. So we have to be able to like see different cultures, experience, and not just say, oh, there they are, but like meet people, talk to people, have conversations, and make sure your kids are involved with it all.
Thank you so much for that, and that's so beautiful. Yeah, these differences are good. I see Julie quoting you there. That's awesome. And for you as well, what would be the one thing that you would share to listeners and viewers?
So, I think I third all of those things. I think it's really important to be an ally, and really offer support. Like I just recently completed a fellowship through the University of Chicago. It's a surgical ethics fellowship, and I had one of my wonderful co-fellows reach out to me and ask like, hey, I've been thinking about you in the last couple of months. How is your family? And that was, to me, really touching. And I told her a little bit about how I was worried about my mom, who walks every day to the Salesforce building up in San Francisco, and right around where there were areas where people were getting attacked. And of course, then my mom got a barrage of phone calls saying you're not allowed to walk there anymore, to which she promptly ignored us. But I mean, I think offering support for your Asian colleagues and friends shows at least a little bit of understanding. And then outside of that, I think if you are a leader, if you lead people, I think it's really important to make sure that you're finding ways to raise to allow the minority voices to be heard. Like pointing people out and actually discussing it and having these conversations in open forums. And like Lori was saying, like create that space, and whether that's social media, whether it's in person, in your family, in your home, in your friends circles, point it out if you see, hey, what did you mean by that when you said that, and not in a judgmental way, just saying like, I kind of want to understand that a little more. What is that you're talking about when you're calling somebody fresh off the boat? What is that? Where's that coming from? I think it's really important just to sort of challenge that in a nice way, and start to open up these conversations. And this goes true for not just AAPI issues, but any of the, racist issues that we're facing right now.
I think you touched on so many things there. And I don't know if you watched Ted Lasso, but he says a quote for those of you who
Of course
watched.
I did.
I love Ted Lasso. It's awesome. And I one of the things that he says all the time is, be curious, not judgmental, right? And that's one of the things that I love. I think kind of gets to the heart of what you're saying, and that it's, it's so much more hard work too to spread hate, right? To spread fear, and it doesn't make anyone feel good. And I think that's one of the things that's important about a lot of the work that we've been doing too at the city, that we most recently partnered with you all on this past weekend. And that was the question that we posed to ourselves is like, how do we continue to create a city of belonging? How do we create more spaces where people feel safe, engage in meaningful dialogue, and to meet their neighbors? And so we actually had so many of you from the Angel City team came out to our community day of service. We were in 5 neighborhoods across the city. We were in historic Filipino town, Chinatown, Little Tokyo, Thai town, and I myself was in Koreatown and Little Bangladesh, because our goal was to bring communities together, and most importantly, to demonstrate that these are safe spaces for people who may not feel safe going out in public right now, people who may feel like they might be attacked. And that, yes, and Julie was there. She was amazing. I'm going to give a real plug real quick, even though I was about in the middle of a very serious sentence, to let you all know that we picked up 135 bags of trash just in the Koreatown and Little Bangladesh site. So not only did we have meaningful, yeah, we won. Not only did we have meaningful dialogue and did we bring together amazing communities, but we cleaned up and beautified our neighborhoods, which was amazing. And so if you're listening and watching, that's also another way for you to figure out, what can I do now after I listen to this conversation? It's to volunteer, it's to give back, it's to lean into these spaces where it might be scary. You don't need to know what ethnicity any of us are, right? If you can ask us a question and start that dialogue. And I think sometimes that's where people get scared, right? Is they also don't want to offend you if they don't know what you are or how to talk to you. And so that's something that I would encourage with everyone listening, watching. And I'm actually going to ask a next question here. And
first of all, really quickly, I love that you watch Ted Lasso and that we all watch it. It's an amazing, optimistic show. I love the quote, by the way. I think that, being curious is probably a mindset that we should all have. I'd love for somebody to ask me what I am instead of presumptively think that I'm Filipino or Mexican. Do you know what I'm saying? I think that can go a long way for sure. Ted Lasso.
There's a lot of Lasso love
Yeah.
in the chat.
That's why I brought it up, because I knew to get the response.
That's awesome. And so maybe this is and I don't think I asked you earlier, is how do you identify, John?
Well, now I used to identify as Asian, and I up until, shout out to Catherine Davila who asked me to do this. I didn't really even put emphasis on being Pacific Islander. I mean, I love being from the islands just in general. But I used to say I'm Asian to make it easy for everybody else. And technically I'm not, and who's to say I'm not, because I'm very close to, I eat more Filipino food than Chamorro food. So I'm by proxy, I am. But I identify as Chamorro because that's where I'm from. I'm Chamorro from Guam. My family's from there. My grandfather, he laid the groundwork over there. He was the chief commissioner of Guam. So I'm very proud to be from Guam. But there was never a voice for a Chamorro, or there's never a category for some Pacific Islanders. Really, it was always other. Do you know what I mean? And I think now I'm proud Pacific Islander. So.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that with us. And, it's not about us and what's convenient. I know you're a Chamorro and proud, Pacific Islander and proud. And I love that you will change the conversation for people in the, in the sports industry who are listening to this. We're saying, yes, I'm going to do what John did. And actually, what about for you, Ronnie and Lori? How do you both identify? And this is probably a question I should have started off with in the very beginning. And I think
should we say it at the same time and see if we get the same thing? See if we're twinning or not.
Ready?
1,
right.
2, 3.
2.
Half Chinese.
Haba. Yeah, half Chinese. I mean,
half Chinese, half Irish, English, Polish, German, Scotch, French, Dutch, Welsh. Ronnie, go ahead.
Mixed heritage. I think honestly, and it's not just like a convenience thing to talk about being Asian American during Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It's kind of at least more of the realization into my adult years that that part has to be celebrated more. Because of the hardships and because of the misrepresentation and the lack of recognition for all of the hardship and everything. And our Chinese side, I would say, they don't talk about what they went through. They don't talk about communist China. They don't talk about going from rich to rags, and then having to build it back up again. And then even to sort of get any information out of them is really difficult. And so it's really hard to celebrate and you don't know a lot about. And then to kind of give mom a few glasses of wine and then ask her to start talking, it's like, that's kind of how we get our information. And so I think that the realization, at least for me, to kind of dig in a little bit on the Chinese side and to be proud. She, talk about where she was born and what she did and how her family came here and to kind of celebrate that all the time. And then that, at least that raises up other people and at least points out that Asians have to, minorities have to do more to get there. You know, it's not just a given. In fact, a lot of I've heard, at least on the backside with some of my colleagues who are sending kids to college now, that it's really hard for Asians to get into college because it's sort of the exact opposite effect. There's too many Asians in college now, too many Asians in institutes of higher education. Now we need to spread it out, and it's like it's near impossible for some of the Asian kids to get into college, which is, I think, a travesty. So I think more so than ever, to really celebrate those things. So I agree. I mean, I think Lori half Asian, and I say Hapa, but it's really kind of to celebrate each of these little pieces of us. I mean, we're like 18 million different things, and my mother-in-law, who's a genealogist, is like tracking down each little road to wherever, and it's really interesting to learn about it all because everybody's ultimately an immigrant.
That's right.
Except for the indigenous American population.
Except for the indigenous, who are the most.
Yeah. And Jessica, what about you?
I identify as Filipina American. I was born in Quezon City, and I came here when I was 4 years old. And come from a big family. There's 6 of us, and so it was, tough, right? We trying to make it in LA, trying to figure out how to use the bus, how to figure out how to get an apartment for a family of 8. I was, really young, but for me, a lot of people in my family were really busy trying to find jobs and trying to figure out how their degrees and their certificates from the Philippines would translate here, because that's also a big issue for immigrants here, is that if you got a degree in your own home country, it's not often recognized in the US. But my sister literally, eldest sister Christine, she'll laugh that I'm sharing this story, literally bought a used Hooked on Phonics set for me from the Penny Saver, and nobody unfortunately had time to help me learn English because they were really busy working so many jobs at fast food restaurants, at retail stores, that they put me in a room. They're like, here, you gotta teach yourself English, and so that was one of my proudest accomplishments, is really just that color coordination with that Hooked on Phonics set and matching the books up with the tape. But, I think that is the immigrant spirit, whether you're first generation or a second generation immigrant, is that we will make it work, and that's what gets lost when we say that that we're the model minority, right? That struggle gets lost because a lot of us have had to overcome our own individual lived experiences and struggles to get where we are. And it's so important to talk about them, even though, like you said earlier, sometimes we may feel a little bit of shame. But there's so much power in our stories, because it's actually something to be proud of. It's why we came to the same country, because we know that this is where we can really help build up not just our own lives and livelihoods, but that of our children and our children's children. So it's so nice to hear you all talk about this out loud, because I see myself in so many of all your stories. And I appreciate you asking me that. And I'm gonna take one more question here. I know we have about 11 minutes left in our session. And this is from @415ZS. I'm not going to try to pronounce this handle, but and we can start with John here. But what are some barriers you've had to face in your field, and how did you overcome them?
Like I said, when I moved here, I didn't see much diversity, or I didn't see myself in a lot of people. So all my superiors were white. I worked in production industry, worked in media, sports. Every single one of them were white. And I'm so grateful for all of them. They're great people, nothing against them. But it was so hard to see myself doing what they do without thinking I need to be more white. still, like today I understand a little bit more about how companies work. But it's hard to think about getting to, to the level that I want to be at without thinking that I need to be a certain way. So, sorry, a little bit of an emotional topic for me. But I would say, I overcame that because I'm trying to overcome that because I look at people as just people now, and I decide, hard work is going to pay off, but I don't look at people as race anymore. With the racial, I'm not saying, hey, because you're white, you got this job. Because you're good at what you do, you got this job. So for me, that's the way I look at things now. A little bit of an optimistic lens, but again, it was hard to get to this point, but now I'm here.
Well, you are getting so much love, and you're hearing it from Julie, the president herself, that there's no ceiling, John, and the Angel City family needs you, and I think you're getting so much love here. So I hope that you feel supported with the Angel City team, because it seems like they are working so hard to uplift you, and all AAPI voices like Julie, like Ronnie and Lori as well. No, Angel City is the most supportive out of everybody I've been around, but I'm not saying this because of me. I'm saying this because there's a lot of people out there who have that same mindset. Somebody on a soccer team who doesn't see an Asian person on the field, they're going to be discouraged. I'm saying this for everybody who feels this way. It's like now we're at the point in society that people are as much as we're focusing on uplifting races, like now it's time to work together, and we need to just go in there and be the best that we can. So thank you for asking that question. So. Of course. And it was, I'm merely the messenger. It was 415ZS who asked that question. And I will turn that same question over to Lori. What are some barriers you had to face in your field? How did you overcome them?
I think for sure not seeing people who looked like us. I never say me because I have a twin sister, so if this is weird for anybody. But yeah, just and the same thing, John. But I think where I feel so grateful is that there are so many, my first profession really was a soccer team. And so when you don't really have, you have superiors in the sense that you have a coach and you have like team captains. But, when I joined the national team, I had the most badass bunch of women that I could possibly imagine. And in my mind, they were superiors. And even though they didn't look like me, but in their mind, like everybody's a teammate. And so you got this very supportive environment to find your passion and find your way towards whatever your passion is. And you couldn't help but be a social justice warrior on that team because you just had these complete pioneers that were setting the stage for everything in women's sports and beyond. And so for me, even though I didn't see anybody, I feel really fortunate that we grew up with parents who were supportive of girls playing sports. If we were born in a different country with parents who didn't support that, it'd be a different story. And then we had coaches along the way and teammates along the way and people along the way that by the time we were sort of adults and I guess in like playing with the big kids, getting a real job, it didn't feel so harrowing anymore to have people who didn't look like you above you. It was like, well, I've already conquered a bunch of this stuff and I did it with a team of really supportive and awesome women and family around you. And so it wasn't as harrowing of a journey as it would have been maybe if I hadn't had those teammates around me. But for certain, being able to see others who look like you is really important.
All right. If you can't see it, you can't be it, right? That's something that Council President Nuri Martinez likes to say, and to quote her. And I think that it's important. You all are breaking the glass ceiling for so many people in your industry. And maybe I'll ask you too, Ronnie, did you have the same experience? Did you have face similar barriers that Lori did, and how did you overcome them?
You know, it's interesting. It's a hard question because I kind of I view my life a little bit in sort of two different stages, right? There's my soccer life and there's my surgeon life, and they're very different. And then sometimes there's these bizarre intersections that that kind of trip me out and takes me a day or two to like, you know, when they intersect, because they just seem so separate. But I would say that I agree with Lori wholeheartedly about having kind of surrounding with yourself with people um, who kind of have like-minded goals, and essentially like you're working towards something as a team. And if that team, the more diverse that the team is, in my opinion, the better they are. And in medicine, that certainly is true. To take care of patients and to make surgery happen. I'm a pediatric surgeon, and so a lot of parents come in with, you know,
Let that buffer for a second. There you go.
can you guys hear me okay? So I mean, I think that as it's been hard sometimes to be female, to be Asian, and to kind of step up to leadership roles when they're offered. I think that that's for me probably the thing that that has made the most difference, is that when something comes up in a leadership role, you know, I've sort of just tried to step up and take it, because I know that there aren't other people that look like me that are going to do that. And then in any leadership role, I think it's really, like I said before, I think it's really, really important to make sure that you're focusing on the voices that are least heard, to really build people up and also provide that other perspective, because, like, you know, you're not going to be as good as that loudest person, right? It's frequently the quietest person that has the most profound and eye-opening thing to say.
Thank you so much for everyone for just sharing your experiences and why this is so important for you. And, you know, I think, you know, for me at the city, I'm the first Filipina American on the Board of Public Works. And this is like super very in the weeds government stuff. But, you know, we are the only full-time executive board at the city, and we make policy and we run services for 4 million residents. And like how I like to describe public works is if you can turn on your lights, wash your dishes, take a shower, take out your trash, and walk your dog on the sidewalk. That is public works. So it's everything that you touch that you don't necessarily know. And we also do infrastructure projects. And one of the things I would love to invite the Angel City team to when everyone is vaccinated and everyone feels comfortable is we also do build soccer fields. And so I'd love to invite your team to come out and see some of the ones that the city of LA has built, because one of the ways that we too like to hold ourselves accountable for everything that you all just mentioned too, is metrics, right? And goals about how we can measure the things that we're doing. One of the things that we know we could do better at is how do we engage more young girls in sports? And so we have an initiative too called Girls Play LA that I think you might have heard about. I know some of you have all helped with at some point. And so that's something that would love to work with your team on, but I think it just gets to the heart of our conversation in that everyone has a role to play, whether you are in social media, whether you're in government, whether you are in, you know, an athlete. Everyone has a role to play to make sure that everyone feels included. And I so thank everyone here for all their generous time and for being with us to listen to the incredible stories of Ronnie, of Lori and John and myself, and for being with us on many of our first IG Lives. So thank you for being patient with us, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And we know that it doesn't end today. This is just the starting point of our conversation.
I want to add to that, and that was beautiful. One thing I just can say, like, as somebody from the islands, for everybody watching, let's practice aloha. Because I think that's something that we're a word so synonymous with the islands that I think if we were doing more of that, staying positive, showing love, being, you know, happy about living in this world, I think we can go a long way. So if just as a, you know, since we're on the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, let's study the word aloha.
What he said.
Thank you, John, and aloha to everybody. And, you know, I think just what a great way to close out our event is let's continue to spread love.